Well, hi and welcome back to Sailing Corribee Moira. It's 2025 and Moira is a totally different boat now. Over the winter I have done a conversion to junk rig and I'm going to do a series of videos. The first one will be introducing you to the junk rig and describing or giving some highlights of how I made the sail. And then there'll be subsequent videos on the mast installation and rigging and also changes to the cabin itself. So lots to come. I've been inspired to go for a junk rig by a few people, including Roger Taylor with Ming Ming 1, which was a junk rig Corribee. He did several long voyages up into the high Arctic with his junk rig. And then there's Wave Rover, which was a home build plywood, epoxy plywood build boat that sailed down the coast of the States and then across the Atlantic to Ireland with a flat 7-panel junk rig sail. And then of course Ming Ming 2, which was Roger Taylor's second junk rig, which has his homemade design of hinges in making the sail. So it's a cambered sail which is easy to sew at home with the space that you have at home on the kitchen table. So why have I gone for a junk rig? Well, overall I think it's an excellent rig that really suits small yacht single-handed sailing. It's a very simple sail to manage and can basically be controlled from the cockpit. Reefing down 1 or 2 panels literally takes 30 seconds just to drop the halyard and adjust a couple of the other lines. And the rig tends to absorb the gusts more. There's less tension. The mast is a freestanding mast with no standing rigging holding it up, so there's not all that tension in the boat and not all that risk of breakage of a stay. That can be so disastrous. You're also much less likely to broach and do what we call a Chinese jibe, because the sail can easily go out to 90 degrees or a bit further with no stays in the way. There's no doubt it's pretty daunting to decide to make your own rig, including sail, mast and all the rest of it, but there's lots of help available. The Junk Rig Association, which is international, is accessible through a really good website which is packed with different forums for discussion, including technical forums where a select group of the members are quick to reply with help and advice and even designs of your sail and so on. And the book known as the Junk Rig Bible, the Practical Junk Rig, is quite a technical book with chapters on all aspects of the rig and setting up the boat and calculations of centre of effort and centre of lateral resistance and how to make your mast strong enough and so on. So it takes a bit of digesting, but once you get your head around all the information, it becomes possible. So I decided that as I was starting in January, the first thing I would start with was sewing the sail, because that can be done in the cooler temperatures where work with epoxy is not possible. To make your own sail, you need a sufficiently large flat area to lay out at least each panel. And the panels, my panels on the ship on the sail are about 3.4 meters long. So I made up this table which is 3.6 meters long. And I put a roller at the right hand end for the sailcloth and a little side table for the sewing machine, and covered it in hardboard so that the material would slide nicely over the surface. If you look in this, just above the centre of the table, there's a socket hanging down, which is for anything that I'm using on the table, such as my hot knife for cutting the sailcloth. It just means you can access all the table easily with the cable. And I put numerous hooks around on the shelving and so on for the hot knife. I was just paranoid about putting it down and touching the sailcloth and burning a hole in the middle of one of the panels by mistake. Before you can start making a sail, you obviously need a design for one, and I was greatly helped here by Arne from the Junk Rig Association, who, in response to my query for converting a Corribee, came up overnight with this design, and he's designed several of his own and advised plenty of other people on dimensions and so on, aspect ratio of the sail. So he came up with this, and he also gave me a suggested position for the mast, which is the single straight line there, whereas the double lines are the existing mast, which is further back and also slightly raked aft. So I also did my own calculations of looking at the central of lateral resistance of the hull and the centre of effort of the sail, and also looked at the original Corribee rig, junk rigged Corribees that were made as junk rigs, and all these different calculations and sources came up with pretty much the same position of the mast, and then also Arne helped with designing how much the sail should overlap the mast. That's called the balance of the sail, to give you a little bit of weather helm and certainly not any lee helm. So starting with that drawing, which I think was about a 1:20 scale, I then had to scale up those measurements to the full size of the sail. And I also did this more detailed drawing, which is a 1:15 scale, with all the batten pockets and other details drawn onto it. And I also copied this and made a mock-up of the whole rig and the hull, all to scale 1:15, just to keep in mind the direction I was going in. So the next decision I had to make was what sailcloth to use, and in general you can use a much lighter weight sailcloth than normal, because each panel is well supported with the batten above and below, and also much of the force is carried by the webbing which is sewn around the whole perimeter of the sail, and so there's much less force on the stitching and the sailcloth itself. Obviously I needed to get a sewing machine, and the ideal might be a more industrial type with a walking foot and various other features, but I was recommended this old Singer from somebody on the Junk Rig Association site, and it's about a 1970s Singer with all metal gears and quite robust in construction, and it's done me very well, and after a service and oil and so on, it's running very smoothly. For thread, I bought thread and other supplies like webbing from Pro Fabrics, and this is a bonded UV resistant polyester thread. Right, so I just wanted to show you the hot knife that I was using to cut my sailcloth out with, which is this HSGM device, quite easy to find online. It was a little bit expensive and I hesitated about getting one initially, but once I got it and started using it, it was no doubt the right thing to have. Basically you pull the trigger and this part here, after about 5-6 seconds, gets hot, and then will then very nicely just cut through any of the materials that I was using. Now you can see, maybe you can see now that's actually glowing red hot. So I saw online that you could also have a little shoe to help cutting sailcloth with, so I actually copied that, cut one out of some stainless steel, and that screws on here and makes it really nice for cutting sailcloth. So I'll just show you that. You can buy the hot knife as an accessory in some places, but it's not that easy to get hold of, so I just copied the design. So just line it up, and then here I've drawn a red line on this piece of This is some of my leftover sailcloth, the Dacron, and you just get it warmed up. You put the shoe underneath the cloth, and very nicely the shadow of the light creates a little V with the blade, and you just basically just run it along like that, and it just works beautifully. So the next stage in this process was to loft out the sail. That means from the scale drawing that I've got, the 1:15 scale drawing, I mark out the full size of each panel on this brown paper with following the dimensions that I've calculated and the angles and so on. And I did this with the right hand side of the table has a lath all the way along it, which forms a straight edge, and from that I could measure angles accurately and get my first sort of baseline at the bottom of the panel, and then mark the luff and the leech at the correct angle, and then measure the length of those, and then mark the top border of the panel. And having got the corners, I could join all these lines together with a chalk line, which I haven't really used before as a building tool, but for in this case it was invaluable because these lines are 3.5 meters long, and that would be hard work to get a straight edge, a good straight edge that long, but the chalk line did it beautifully. And the plans also give you the length of the diagonals of each panel just to check the geometry, and I have to say they came within about 2 or 3 millimeters on each of the drawings, so I was pretty chuffed with that. The bottom 4 panels are essentially a parallelogram, quite straightforward, and the next one is called a transition panel. It's slightly tapered, and then the top 2 are essentially triangular. So you mark out the basic geometrical shape of the panel, so let's say the parallelogram, but then in order to create camber in the sail, you draw the top and bottom borders with a curve in called a barrel curve, and you calculate this how big the curve is, but you can see here I've got 2 thin battens going along the top and bottom edge which have a curve in them, and I've calculated that for each panel how much that curve should be. And then when you sew that as a straight line to the neighbouring panel, you get a belly in the sail. So that's very clever. As you go up the sail towards the top panels, you put less curvature in, because you want those to be flatter panels, because they will be your storm sail, which you use when it's windier, and you want less power in the sail. So this, I've all worked this all out beforehand. It's all written on my 1:15 scale drawing, so I can just transfer all that information onto the lofting table. The way I'm talking about it, it sounds like I've done it before, but I haven't. I just spent a long time digesting all the instructions that I had, and each time I did it, I got better and better at it, and so on. So it was a long learning process, but the main thing is just to read all the instructions enough times so the whole process is in your head. So now I have full-size drawings of every panel, and the time has come to transfer those to the sailcloth and to cut out each individual panel with its barrel curves along the top and bottom borders. So I'm just getting what's now going to become my sewing table ready, and unroll the first sheet. You'll see on the left hand side near the camera there is a slight extension to the side of the table, which is because the top 2 panels, which are triangular, have a wider base, and that is just to accommodate them when we get to that stage. But I start with the bottom 4 panels, which are simple parallelograms, and aim to get the sailcloth nicely stretched out on the table with some masking tape, and then choose my appropriate full-size drawing from the ones that I've been doing. Quite a lot of these next clips are speeded up because it's a repetitive process, but it's nice just to give you a feel for how it all goes. So get the drawing laid out, and you can see that there are a lot of crinkles in the paper. It's quite thin, and before I start marking out I get all those crinkles and creases removed, and so I just get an exact, I mark out an exact representation of that sheet. For marking out the sailcloth, I bought a couple of bits of tailor's chalk, but it didn't seem to mark onto the polyester cloth very well, so then I got these, I think there's some sort of wax tailor's crayon, which did a much better job. Needed to be sharpened regularly, but here I am going around the border of the panel and just trying to keep the paper flat and follow it nice and accurately. Every panel is cut with a 2 centimetre extra size all the way around. So on the luff and the leech, that's folded over to make a hem, and at the top and bottom of the panels, that is used to make the seams between the panels, which I'll show you in a bit. So this is just marking out the true border of the drawing. There we go. Now I'm just getting a compass, and poor light in the garage and poor eyesight. I have to bend down like a blind man just to set the compass to 2 centimetres, and I then go around the whole border of the sail of the panel again, marking out that 2 centimetre allowance for the seams. The original line you've marked is where you fold the cloth, so both lines are useful. Quick sharpen. Luff and leech a straight line, so I can do those quickly with the ruler, and then along the top side of the panel. I've speeded these up 4 or 5 times, but still taking a little while to get all the marking done. Great, so just getting the corners done. And you just need to cut this panel off the rest of the roll of sailcloth, and this is where the hot knife really comes into its own. You can see that light that it has shining forward, which, as I said earlier, actually the way it casts a shadow going past the blade gives you this perfect little V shape to line up with the lines that you've drawn. So here I am going at quadruple speed, cutting out, and it cuts and seals the cloth so there's no fraying, and you can see how having the socket hanging down in the centre of the table makes it easy just to make your way around the whole table in one go. hanging up on its hook, so I avoid burning the sailcloth, and then off comes the paper drawing. I'll need this for the next 3 panels as well, so there's a lot of repetitive activity in making the sail, and usually I'm not very good at being patient with that, but I try to steel myself to be slow and steady rather than fast, just to make a nice job of it. So I just write on this is at the luff of the sail in the bottom corner, I just mark a number P1 for the first panel, just so when I start sewing them up together I know which ones I'm joining. There are plenty of other ways to make a junk sail, and if you have a full sailmaker's sewing floor where the cloth floats on air and a nice big sewing machine, then it's a different, you can do it in more complicated ways, but Arne's method of making the panels and creating the camber is very good for a home build. There we go, so that's the first panel done, and then I'm just going to quickly take you through the top panels now. You can see these panels I've got here are triangular, and this is where the top of the sail sort of fans up with so that the yard is about 60 degrees angle, and you can see now why I need that extension for the corner of the triangle shape of the panels. I've speeded this bit up massively now just to get through it. The nice thing here is that these panels are both the same length as the other ones, but I can fit 2 on one section of sailcloth, which saves a bit of money on sailcloth. So I've marked it out and then quickly whip round the cutting it out, and you can see there's much less barrel curve on the side of these top panels. It's about 1/3 of the amount compared to the main bottom panels. There we go. So we cut that one out, and then that is all the panels cut out. So now I'm just going to show you a little bit more of some rest of the sewing. This is the top panel, and the long left-hand border is the upper border of the sail that will go onto the yard, and I've already folded over a 2 centimetre seam there. Likewise on the leech, which is nearest us, I've folded over a 2 centimetre seam, and I've also sewn in a bit of ribbon as telltale, so each panel gets a telltale sewn into it at this stage. So as I said earlier, the whole border of the sail has some webbing sewn around it, which really carries most of the force. It gives you strong attachment points for all the lines, the lashing and so on, and it carries the weight of the sail and also just the force of the wind on the sail. So I've got a big roll of, I think it's 50mm webbing, and just cut that to length. I put a roll of it at the bottom of the table there so it was easy to get out. And a lot of the sewing now is done with stapling the seams before you sew them, and it's a very nice way of doing it. So I just run along the edge of the sail, stapling the webbing into place. And all the other sides where there's webbing, I did 2 parallel rows of stitching, but because this is the very top of the sail, which is lashed to the yard and it carries the weight of the sail the whole time, I decided to do 3, so I did 1 near each edge of the webbing and 1 right down the centre to run this webbing through the sewing machine, I made a little guide which bolts onto the sort of base plate just inside the needle, and then I can run the edge of the webbing along that guide and it will just give me a straighter seam, and I can adjust it for the different positions of the line of stitching along the webbing. So the staples are down the middle of the webbing, and then I do a seam either side of that. That's the first one done, and this goes pretty well. The machine copes very well with the going through the webbing, doesn't even notice really. Once you get onto double or triple webbing thickness, then it's a bit more of a struggle. So this is now doing the second line of stitching, and then I take all the staples out because they are going down the middle where I want to run the third line of stitching. So staples out, and then run it through for the third time. Cut that off, and there we have the top panel sort of ready for the next stage. The next stage here is to sew on about 10 little webbing loops, which will be for lashing it onto the yard, which will be an aluminium tube. So I'm marking every 30 centimeters approximately, and then I've got some 25mm white webbing, and I just worked out how long each bit of webbing loop has to be and try and make them all the same so it hangs evenly. And I just mark that out on this bit of plywood, and then I can just having a little think there. So I just know where my marks are, and I can just cut each one. As I said, there's quite a lot of repetitive things that you do in the sail making, and it's quite nice to come up with efficient ways of doing it quickly and accurately. So there we go, that's about 10 little bits of webbing, and I fold each one in half and then staple it in that folded position. So when you push it either side of the webbing to sew it, you've got the same length either side. So gather those together, and quick cup of coffee and a biscuit just to keep me going. And here we go. So I just do a couple of lines of double, triple stitching on each bit of webbing. And repeat until they're all done. At this stage I had double sailcloth, blue webbing, and then a double layer of the white webbing, so I did break a few needles doing these. You find if it's not feeding at the right speed, then you can easily break a needle. It's quite cold at this time of year. This was in January, so I'm actually sitting with an electric heater between my legs just under the sewing machine just to keep me warm. So there you can see a nice row of white eyes sewed along the top of the sail, and just going to show you the beginning of me joining this panel to the next one below it. So I'm just unrolling the next panel down, which is another triangular panel, and you have to put one of them upside down and one of them the right way up, and then sew along the overlapping edges. So this one is now upside down. That's the upper edge along the left hand side. And put the top panel on top of it. These were easier to sew because the barrel curves were much less, and then they sort of lined up more easily. But Spent a bit of time just getting particularly this is the luff of the sail, these two pieces here, and I just found the corresponding points on both panels and put a pin through, and then actually hammered that into the wood at the end of the sewing table to get that luff really nicely lined up. So I spent quite a bit of time just getting this right and making sure I was doing it correctly. And then once I'd done that, I stapled along, got it lined up nicely at the other end, and then just run a line of staples down out of the way of where I'm going to stitch. Come the staples. Used a lot of staples. Not often you finish a whole box of staples in one job, but I did with this. You see it's jammed a bit as well. There we go. So I just wanted to finish by showing you a bit of the detail of the construction. You can see here the seam, and this is now the luff of the top three panels, and you can see a batten pocket there which I've sewn in, and that's where the battens will slide in along. Here you can just see this is now the whole sail, and I'm just finishing off, I think, the luff, blue luff webbing, joining that, and here you can see that in line with each batten pocket there is a loop in the blue webbing, which is where the battens pass through and they carry the weight of the sail. And you can also see the yellow loops where I tie in the battens to the sail. This is just showing you a batten going through the batten pocket and coming out through the blue loop in the webbing. So this is the final sail, laid out in all its glory, with white lashing loops sewn along the bottom, the foot of the sail and the top, all the batten pockets and so on. And I even sewn a sail bag just underneath the side of it there to keep the sail in. So that's all for this film. It's been quite a long one. I hope it's been interesting and I've managed to sustain your interest and patience to the very end. And next time I'll be moving on to the mast and the rigging. Bye for now.